This is the First42K podcast. I'm your host, Sean Bell, ultra runner, speaker, and co-founder of First42K. Through this podcast, I'll be bringing you inspiring stories of everyday people who have fallen in love with running. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that this podcast is being created on, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and any of our First Nations community listening today. It's quite a rare thing to be able to say and clearly show others that people have changed your life for the better. Since meeting David DJ Jones and Jase Coach Cronshaw in 2018, that's exactly what they've done for me. They've helped me achieve feats like 50 marathons in 50 days, 24-hour runs, and a 4,000 kilometer run from Cairns to Melbourne. So as the founding episode of the First42K podcast, I wanted to host my business partners, DJ and Jase, as it was the three of us who launched First42K on April 11, 2021, and we have a ball working together. Devastatingly, our world was shattered on April 15, 2022, when Jase passed away suddenly. He will always hold a deep place in our hearts. I'm so grateful that I interviewed Jase back in 2021 before my Run for Wishes. So that Jase is a part of our founding episode, we're going to share snippets of him from that podcast. We will release his full podcast episode at a later date. Through this episode, I share with you who DJ is and the amazing things he does. He loves helping others and he's a man of many talents. You will learn very quickly that running is just one of them. We deep dive into his beautiful friendship with Coach Cronshaw and touch on some of the amazing things we've experienced together, like the Bali Hope Ultra. I can't thank DJ enough for chatting to me on the podcast, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to our very first episode of the First42K podcast. I'm thrilled to have DJ with me today, David DJ Jones. DJ, welcome.
Thank you, Shawnee. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have a chat with you. It's something that we've been looking forward to doing together for a little while, a podcast. And whilst I will be facilitating most of the podcast episodes, and you may not be on every single one of them, I think it's really important as the first podcast to have you as my guest, because I think we want to share why we wanted to start First42K, a little bit of a background into yourself, into Jase, who we'll touch on, into myself, and to give other people that insight of why we've created First42K and what we're about, which is helping other people fall in love with running. So to start with, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about yourself. And obviously, as we are a running-based podcast, the first question I'm going to come at you with is, have you always been a runner? And if not, when did you get into running?
Yeah, so that's and it's a story I love to tell, because I wasn't a runner, so I probably did a little bit when I was young. The normal sort of zone carnival type stuff, and 1,500 meters I think is the most I ever ran in high school, but I didn't love it. It was just sort of something you did, and really while I played a bit of sort of tennis and a little bit of basketball and group sport, that sort of stuff, running wasn't my thing at all. And it was really only in my 30s, which I'd like to say is only a couple of years ago, but it's probably about 13 years ago now. And I work full-time as a lawyer. So I'd been traveling up from Wollongong to Sydney basically for about 8 years, sort of a couple of hours each way, eating not that well, working long hours, and you drive home and have a Coke and chips on the way home, that sort of stuff, and just wasn't feeling great. And I must have whinged about it one too many times at work, because the lady there by the name of Margaret Hammond, who I'll speak a bit more about soon, but she runs sort of 4 kilometres at least every day, pretty much her entire life. She's in her 70s now. At that stage would have been in late 50s. And she's like, right, come for a run. I'm sick of you complaining. So I went for a run with her the next day, sort of brought my Converse, my Dunlop volleys, and brought what passed for running gear at the time. I went for a run and I couldn't keep up with her. I was like, this is a bit of a problem. And and it really, I really put it down to that first run and her asking me to go out with her to do that. That led to sort of where we are now. And it was literally sort of a snowball effect. I ran with her a couple of times a week, started to sort of enjoy myself. She kept telling me I needed to get some proper running shoes. I'm like, no, I've worn volleys all my life, they'll be fine. So after a couple of months, I had stress fractures in both feet and had needed a couple of months off, but I sort of had the bug by that point. So I came back, started doing a bit of boot camp. Someone said, let's do an Oxfam. And I thought, well, let's go all in. So we did 100, trained for a few months for 100K, sort of walking in Oxfam together as a team. And I really just sort of went from there, and gradually fell in with more and more extreme people, and just started to enjoy running longer and longer distances. So yeah, and that's, the rest is history now, but that's sort of how it all started, from that very first conversation. And ever since, any long run or event that I've done, Margaret's actually called almost every single time in the middle of the run just to check in how things going, and that's been a really nice sort of continuous thing since the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that that's pretty special for her as well, because she can know, looking back, that she introduced you to something that now you love so much, and you've been able to share that love with other people with running. So let's talk about that. I think, some people may not know our story, how we got to know each other. And it was 2018 when I first met you and also Jase. And that was because I had my own adversity back in 2016. I had a friend of mine, Joey, pass away in his sleep in 2016, and I really wanted to do something to empower our community. And I'd fallen in love with running from my first marathon in 2017, and I tapped into something special, which was when I realized how powerful the mind is when you can start to run for something other than just yourself, when you can start to connect to a greater purpose. And I realized the power in that and what I was able to then achieve. And I came up with this big goal of running 50 marathons in 50 days at the start of 2019. And I knew that I had the reasons why, and I believed that I had the mental toughness to be able to get me there. But was my body going to fall apart? So I knew I had to find a mentor who was going to be able to guide me in the right direction. And I reached out to an ultra marathon runner, Samantha Gash, who I'm still in awe of to this day. She's an incredible person, incredible athlete. And it was through reaching out to her that she then took the time to have a coffee with me and recommended that I get in touch with you guys. And 2 days later, after our coffee chat, I remember getting a phone call from Jase, and the rest is history. With what I've been able to achieve as a runner, it's been a phenomenal journey. And I think you've really taught me how special running is and how much running can positively impact your own life. And through that, we've then become incredibly close friends, and also wanted to go on a journey where we could share that and help other people fall in love with running as well. So that's a little bit of an intro to how we met. But I think, I guess looking back at that time, like I was a 21-year-old kid with this big ambitious goal. What was the first thing that came to mind when you heard that someone wanted to work with you potentially? And did you think it was possible? Sort of what was the things that came to mind when you had that conversation with Jase?
Yeah, well, I think by the time we had that call, and Sam had told us, Sam's been a friend of mine for a long time. She actually worked at the same law firm as me before. She sort of got into the what she does now. And, at present, I was just talking to her just before this, actually. She's in Nepal and doing some visits with World Vision, and about to run across Nepal in one of the most ridiculous runs she's done yet. But as soon as she recommended you to us, we knew that, you would have what it needed to get it done. Like, she has a way of sort of seeing that in people. But also, I think by that time Jase and I had sort of gone through our own journey of sort of understanding, going from just, we want to run further and longer distances and faster and do the best that we can, to realizing that what you sort of came into it with, which is that running is more about, if you're doing it for other people or with another cause or something in mind, it's so much more powerful. And, so he and I had come to that realization in our late 30s, early 40s, and he was this kid at 21 who'd already figured that out. And we're like, well, we can probably learn a bit from this guy already. So look, it was with knowing, comparatively how little running you'd done and then what you were looking to do, we knew it was going to be a big job. But I think we had one or two conversations with you, and both of us went, nah, this guy's pretty special. We reckon he's going to be able to get this done. And you proved that right. So
no, thank you. Very nice words. And yeah, I think I share with my inner circle, with my close friends, with my family, that you're one of my biggest role models. And I truly mean that. I think, to other people who may not know who you are, but then to me and the impact that you've had on my life, it's something that I cherish, I don't take for granted. And just to list a few things so people are aware. You're a very present, loving father and husband. You're an ultra endurance athlete. You're a successful businessman, as you touched on, a lawyer. You're a surfer. You play the piano, and you can also play the saxophone. DJ, what can't you do?
It sounds great when you list it like that, but there's a lot of things I can't do. um, that's really that's it's really a matter of sort of following your passions. Like it's one of the things I get asked most often, I guess, is how do you fit all that in? And I'm like, well, I don't actually have any. I've got exactly the same amount of time in the day as you have. Like maybe I probably don't sleep as much as I do, which is one of the things that we would always say to our athletes. Sleep is the most important thing you can do for your mental health and future longevity. So I probably make some more sacrifices in that space than I really should. But ultimately, I do the things that I'm passionate about that mean a lot to me and that I know improve the lives of other people. So, at the core of all of that is being a father and husband. Like that is, always going to be number one most important thing for me. But I know, and I learned really quickly when I started, a structured program of exercise. So running more, doing a lot of strength training, which, is a very important part of First 42K. And as you know, a lot of your own training that sort of makes an endurance runner, durable and means you can get through stuff and keep going is the strength training. But I know when I do all that sort of stuff, I'm actually a better person.
Yeah.
I'm happier, I'm healthier, I'm more focused, I'm more able to be present. So, all of that, and the same with any of those other things, right? Surfing and playing saxophone and piano are all ways of escape for me. And it's not like I do all of those things every day. The social media impact of, image of all of this is, of course, we're only going to post the good fun stuff like that, right? You don't have. Today I spent 18 hours reviewing a contract and it bored me out of my mind, but that's not going to make social media anytime. So, there's a lot of hard work behind all of that, and there's a lot of making sacrifices of some parts of your life because you think what you're doing at that time is going to make you better in those parts of your life down the track.
Yeah.
Life is a constant sort of balancing act in those sort of areas for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on that first Oxfam event, pretty much going from not a whole lot of running to straight into 100 kilometers. Tell us a little bit more about that. I know you said you ended up getting a few fractures in your feet, so that must have been a pretty interesting experience for you. But then to transition to where you are today is someone who's run, I don't even know the exact amount, many ultra marathons, and we can talk about that. But take us back to that first Oxfam experience.
Yeah, that was an amazing experience, and a lot of it was in mental resilience as well, which really any sort of ultra run or any running, but particularly ultra running is sort of 80 or 90% mental. Once you got the body, okay to get there, your brain will get you through pretty much everything. But that first one, I just sort of put my hand up in the Oxfam webpage. I didn't have many friends at the time who I thought would want to do it with me. I learned the other way later. I did have quite a bunch of friends who wanted to do it with me after I'd done the first one. But at that stage, I sort of teamed up with a group of people who I didn't know before that. There was a couple from the legal industry, one of their friends. One of them was doing it particularly to get over a fairly destructive relationship that they'd just got out of. And it's like, this was on to prove to themselves that they could do this. So we trained together. We became good friends from doing that. I did a lot more sort of boot camp training, and that leads to the story of how I met Jase, which I'll tell in a minute. But sort of through that training process, we got ourselves to the start line, and then right at the start line, that person saw their ex-partner that they'd been trying to sort of do this for. So we're immediately in sort of this state of really high stress and anxiety. And that translated, and it's one of the things that we sort of see over time is if you're not sort of settled in your own mind when you're doing these sort of things, it can really manifest physically. And so they had a lot of physical issues. One of the team members did actually drop out at about the 60K checkpoint, something like that. But the other three of us got through, but it took something like 36 or 37 hours. Like, it was a long, long time on our feet. And I'd never been on my feet for that long before. My wife reminds me of the story when I hopped in the car after that. And I was sort of chatting away to her, and she said I fell asleep in the middle of a sentence, and like, I don't remember anything else till we sort of got home an hour or two later. But it was, there was so much I learned from that experience. There was still, it didn't tick the box for me to get into ultra running at that point, but I was like, oh, I think I could do another one of these like this. I'd like to come back and do a few things differently. And I ended up doing about 6 Oxfams, and the last one I did, we did run with a group of friends. But by that stage, I'd already run a couple of sort of 100K ultras, so I sort of knew what I was in for. But yeah, it really taught me a lot about how to endure, but also that my body was reasonably okay at recovering from that sort of long distance stuff. So that's also been a bit of a benefit over time.
Yeah, definitely, and a lot of self-discovery, I'm sure, in 37 hours. That's a big feat. So after that, you do your 100K, and then from there you start to feel the benefit from more and more movement that you touched on. So having a stressful job as a lawyer, and then running with your friend, and then now all of a sudden you start to join a boot camp group. So share with me how that experience unfolded. And you touched on there, that was where you met Jase, who was a co-founder of First42K, who I'm excited to talk about, because Jase, like yourself, had one of the biggest impacts on my life, and no doubt on your life as your best friends. So firstly, talk to me about how you got into the bootcamp experience and how that was, and then the relationship that blossomed with Jase as a result of that.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, it's one of my favorite stories to tell because it's so random in many ways. And so I had, through my work, just the normal sort of corporate bootcamp program had been running. I'd go 3 days a week with a small group and was enjoying that, getting that sort of consistency in training. And then the guy who ran that, who I'm still in touch with today, like he's still around, but he's on the Northern Beaches now, so I don't really train with that much. But he's the son of a really famous mountaineer who's done a lot of the big peaks, and has done a lot of still tours now as a sort of a motivational coach. But he I was going to have a month off to go and take some athletes who'd been training to do base camp in Nepal. So I was like, oh, well, I don't want to stop training, so I'll look around, and I just Googled boot camps in the city, and found an organization called Original Boot Camp, which is one of the original. So Chief Brabham and his wife Emily, who basically started Original Boot Camp, they started the sort of fitness first boot camp back in the days, and they were really the first people to bring military inspired training to civilians. So they had this program running in the city. Dropped them an email, sort of October, around 12 years or so ago now. Still got the original email, and said, I wouldn't mind coming along. This sounds good. So I went to that, and that was every month they do a benchmark test. So you, just as a way of sort of gauging your progress, and so I turned up for benchmark, and as it turned out, I was in the line. It was the second month that Jase had been there. So he'd joined for totally different reasons. He was sort of having a recovery process from sobriety and addiction and a number of other things, and so really getting into exercise to try and kick those habits. So we were next to each other. We it was like a 1 mile, it was 400-meter run, 10 push-ups, 10 burpees, 10 squats, 3 times, and then a 1 mile run. I think I only threw up once. I remember watching all these people around me smashing out the push-ups and sit-ups, which I never really did a lot of. I was like, how the hell I'm not gonna fit in here at all. But Jason and a couple of other people who I was sort of near at the time were incredibly encouraging, really supportive, and we just sort of hit it off. I was like, oh, okay, maybe, I think I can enjoy this. And of course, the very nature of a competitive environment like that is, oh, I want to come back, and these people started some time ago as well, so I want to come back and see if I can maybe catch up with them. And a couple of weeks after that, as part of the weekend things they did, we went out to the sand dunes in Wanda, which I've now been going to pretty much every week for the last 10 years. And we had a really good session out there, ran back to the car. I'd left my jumper out in the sand dunes. And I was like, oh, I've got, and we were absolutely stuffed. And Jay said, oh, look, I'll come out with you. We'll go back and get it. And there's a great photo of that floating around somewhere that someone took as we were running back out. And that's sort of where we really hit it off. We had a really wonderful conversation. Jace had never really had someone in his life that he'd sort of talked about in detail about some of the addiction and other issues he'd had in his life. Um, and I'm an only child, and I'd never really had someone I'd sort of considered a brother before. And it really only took a couple of months before we had that sort of a relationship. And we probably then, almost every day for the next 12 years, that would have been pretty rare that we didn't talk. And so that, we both, I did my first ultra not too long after that, and then dragged Jase along for his first one as well. And he's like, oh, actually, this is pretty good. And it really, the short version from there is that basically we both went, well, look, over a course of sort of 3 years, it cemented Jase's sobriety. He replaced, his addictions he'd had before with addictions to exercise. And it took a couple of years before he would really sort of tell me a lot of what he'd gone through. But that was all part of that recovery process. And we both realized, look, I wasn't getting over those sort of issues, but it did. I knew it had made me a happier and healthier person and a better father, and I think better at work and all those sorts of things. And like, well, we want to share this with other people. And so that's sort of, it went from there. And that's where we went out, we set up our own franchise of Original Boot Camp. And then over the next couple of years, gradually sort of morphed that into an endurance training business, and then went out on our own. Then met you, and then here we are. So it's amazing. And that's really all in the space of sort of 10, 12 years.
Yeah, it is an amazing story. And one thing that I absolutely love, and I know the story, but our listeners definitely don't, is the name V&B Athletics. So that was the business that you guys started together. It was through V&B Athletic that you guys coached me up for my feats of 50 marathons in 50 days and Bali Hope Ultra, which was an incredible experience, which we'll come back to later in the podcast. A number of things. But V&B Athletic, what does it mean? Because when I first started with you guys, I was always intrigued. And then I had a conversation with you and I was like, wow, that's a pretty special thing.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with the beer. And unfortunately, we were at mate and I were at Red Bull Defiance recently, and they kept reading us out as VB Athletic. I was like, no, there's an end in there. So there was, if people go to YouTube and look up the grandmothers of endurance running, you'll see where V&B came from. But basically, there were these two ladies called Vicky and Barb, who came to running quite late in their lives, sort of, I think 40s and 50s, met reasonably late as well. And by the time we came across them and stories were starting to be done on them, they were in their 70s, and I think Barb had just ticked over 80, and they were still running 100-mile events. So there was that part of it, and there was also just the description of who they were. Like, Barb was sort of the quieter but slightly more, secretly competitive. She was definitely faster than Vicky. Vicky was a bit more laid back, and just all the descriptions we'd read about them, like Barb matched Jase to a T and Vicky matched me to a T. And we're like, okay. So we started amongst our sort of training friends, they knew us as Vicky and Barb. And we're like, well, that sounds pretty cool. So, and ultimately the philosophy was, well, look, if we can train people in a way that's sustainable and means that when they get to their 70s and 80s, and more particularly if we get to our 70s and 80s, we can still do those sort of events, then we've achieved something. And so that was the sort of philosophy behind it. We met them only over Facebook and chats, but at one stage I sort of tracked them down, and Barb had just run, I think it still stands, it was like the fastest 100-mile event for an 82-year-old or something nuts. Like, it's just, and I think Barb has unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago now, in her late 80s. But that was sort of the underlying philosophy for all of that. And they were we emailed them and said, oh, look, we'd love to be able to call our business after you. And they sent us signed photos. They were tickled pink. It was very cool.
Yeah, that is such an extraordinary story. And wow, if you can run 100 miles in your 80s, then I think to anyone listening to this, there is no excuse. If you want to get started with running, just take that step, because that is living proof of people who have achieved extraordinary things, and they were just normal people going out there and inspiring so many along the way. And one thing you touched on there was their training philosophy, which really interested me, because I think as someone who was a young kid, I was only 20 years old when I sort of delved into running. I ran my first marathon, and then I was trying to figure it out on my own, like so many people do. And I was running to uni 3 days a week. My uni was 21 kilometers away from my home. And so I'm effectively doing 3 long runs a week. I wasn't doing the strength training. I was doing massive mileage. On top of those 3 long runs a week, I was running every day. So I was running anywhere from 100 to 120 kilometer weeks with a body that really wasn't capable of that much mileage. And it wasn't until I met both you and Jase, and you introduced me to this different training philosophy that changed my experience with running completely, from less pain in my joints to just overall more happiness, being able to achieve these goals, and then the ability to recover. You know, you look at just recently having finished a 4,000 kilometer run from Cairns to Melbourne for Make-A-Wish, and that was 60 days of running, and yet I'm fine. And so that's what really interests me, is that holistic training approach. And I know that's what you have set V&B Athletic up around, that holistic training approach. And then we've also gone through with setting First42K up in the same way. I think to the runners listening to this who were thinking, oh, okay, like, yeah, it sort of makes sense, but I'm a runner, or I just want to run. If you were to share a little bit on that experience and why this holistic approach works, I guess, how could you talk to that? What would be, not only from your experience and what you've seen in me, but some pieces of advice that you could share with the runner? Why is it so important to have that holistic approach to training?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and if you look up any sort of modern day training program now for any level of athlete, but particularly high level of athletes, you will see strength training is like a fundamental component. But even sort of when I started, and still now, like if there'll be running programs out there that say, well, look, I want to run my first ultra marathon, and so there'll be a program that has you running 100 to 200 Ks a week, doesn't talk about strength training at all, might suggest maybe a bit of stretching or massage every now and then. And that's sort of what I followed when I did my first 100. So I was running big, 120, 150 Ks a week, lots of niggles, really bad knees. And I just assumed that was what sort of came with it. And, a lot of, while we've learned and continue to learn from a lot of experts in the field, a lot of the stuff that we've done in developing this has come from us making mistakes, right? So that first 100K, I ran it a lot. It's what's now known as the UTA, and back then was the North Face Ultra. It might have only been its 3rd or 4th year. There's only a few hundred people in it at the time. I did it in a bit over 18 hours, which I was hoping for something less than 24 because I had no idea. So that was fine, but I was in a bit of a state, really sore legs and knees and everything for, a couple of weeks afterwards. Lost lots of toenails, all that sort of stuff. And then both the boot camp trainer and another trainer of mine who I work with really closely now called Jock Campbell, who runs a group called Jock Athletic and works with a lot of elite level runners, particularly young runners. I'm the exception to that rule. But both of them said, well, look, let's cut back the mileage. We're going to do a lot more strength training, a lot more very specific training. So, interval work. If you're going to run an ultra that has a lot of hills, then we're going to do a lot more hills. We're going to do some sand training, so it's lower impact. So I spent a lot more time in the dunes, and I did a lot of strength training with sandbags, sandballs. It's developed a lot more now, but at that stage it was just a bit of combination of body weight and some of the weighted exercises 3 or 4 times a week. And I ran a half marathon in that year, but that was the furthest I ran. And most weeks I rarely did more than 20 or 30 Ks. And then I ran 2.5 hours faster the next time I did the North Face Ultra. So I was like, okay, well and I felt fantastic, and I was like pain-free within 2 or 3 days. So still lost a lot of toenails, but that doesn't seem to change. So that was sort of the lesson. And then it was about refining that and saying, okay, well, that's how you get through. Like if you just want to finish, and you want to finish in good condition, then that's how you get through. And then you adapt that to, if you want to get through fast, and if you've got the talent to actually go faster and faster, then you do a combination of those. So you are running a lot more than just 15 or 20 Ks a week, but you're doing it in a really structured way, and you're doing it with that weight training, with yoga, with flexibility, mobility type stuff, which is also fundamental, particularly as you get older. And then the next part is you're getting the right fuel in, right? So not just in training, but also during the event itself. And we've made lots of mistakes with that, and ended up on drips and in hospital and all sorts of things with our improper fueling during ultra marathons as well. So that's sort of why ultimately we're like, we've actually got to have something there that is, touches on all of those things if you want to get it right.
Yeah, definitely. No, it is. It's such a holistic approach with whether it's your first marathon, ultra marathon, or even less than that, 5K, 10K, 21K. It's a big thing, and you've got to respect what you're asking your body to do. And if you look after it, it will look after you. And I know, so many examples of that. And I think that's a really incredible thing. So I want to talk more about Jase, because as I touched on, he was such an important person to me, and he still is, and to you even more so, like someone who, as you referred to in your own words, as a brother, someone who had such a considerable impact. And then through V&B Athletic, you changed many lives, including my own. And then we started this venture of First42K together. Jase passed away earlier this year on the 15th of April, and it's been a very tough time navigating through that next chapter of life myself. I can't even imagine how that's been for you. How are you coping, without your best friend?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there is no easy path in those sort of things, and I've been in many ways really fortunate that I haven't had a lot of loss in my life, like other than the what everybody goes through with grandparents and things. And so to be so fortunate to find someone like that at a relatively late stage in life. I've had some really close friends, and still have some really close friends from uni and high school days and those sorts of things, but I'd never sort of had the experience of someone that close, who I then really spent every day with, just the nature of setting up the business together and training together and going through. Anyone who's run an ultra marathon and spent most of that time with someone, you really you can learn so much about someone in 10, 12 hours. You share a lot, down from what color is your wee, then you're getting enough water in. So it's amazing. And we did, we probably did 20 or 30 ultra marathons together, as well as running all the business together. So I'd never had the chance to get to know someone that well before. So to lose someone like that, so suddenly, as happened here, has been really difficult. But the one thing that has made that special in many ways, and made it, given us a path forward, is the impact that he's had on so many people. So both through this business, so he basically ran V&B full time. That was his full time job, and I did as much of it with him as I could, and alongside him. But he had a huge impact on both the athletes that we trained in our group training, and then the one-on-one. So the examples of people that we've individually coached, like we did with you, there's a whole bunch of them. And then because we did learn that our favorite thing to do in those ultra runs was not actually to try and just win them, which neither of us were ever going to be quite capable of doing, but or even just better our previous efforts, but it was actually to hang out at the back. And to sweep the event. So you run at the back at the pace that's the cutoff time. So you're helping people who quite often are either injured, who are doing a run for the first time and haven't figured out a lot of the stuff about how to pace themselves. And for both of us, and it was at the heart of V&B, right? It's for both of us, watching people achieve those sorts of things. And not often, we're not actually helping them. We're just there chatting to them. Like, it's not like we're carrying them up hills or anything, but to experience that with people is such a special thing. And there were heaps of people that I've met since he passed, particularly like during those years, but also since he's passed, who've sort of contacted me and said, Jase is the reason that I run. And it might have been a 30-second conversation that he had on the trail with them. And, so many people leave this world and don't leave much of an impact behind, but there are so many people who are better off for having met Jase, and who have bettered their own lives because of that makes it really special. And that's and celebrating. That's sort of, I guess, the time I miss him most is when people I know that we both know achieve something amazing, and my instant thing is, I've got to call Jason and tell him, like, it's brilliant. And I just had, the biggest one of those I just had recently is I've just come back. So Jace's wife Jackie decided not long after he passed that one of the events we'd been building up to, which is the Barley Hope Ultra, which is a run I'd done a couple of times before and Jace had done once before. And she decided, she'd run one marathon before, and she'll be the first to admit that she didn't enjoy a lot of the second half of that. But she decided that she was going to run this 84K event across Bali, and has spent sort of the last 4 months or so training up for that. And then we ran that together just recently, and she smashed it. And that, again, that's the thing I most wanted to do with that, is say to Jase, you'd be so proud of this woman, like, just what an incredible achievement. So it has been a big year, but there is so many special things we can't change what's happened now, but we can sort of take the best parts out of that. And he was one of those people who just make you want to be a better person. And so the best I can do for that is to be that better person and live my life the same way, and hopefully inspire other people to do the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's so well said, DJ. And look, I know that humility is one of the highest traits, characteristics, values of both Jase and yourself. And even what you were sharing then about being sweepers at the event, and you were just having a conversation with these people. You weren't helping them, but you were just having a conversation with them. And I think, if I was to get those people on the podcast, they would say how much you were truly helping them. But you're both so humble in that you wouldn't truly recognize the nature of that and what you do. And I think it's so special, and that's why you've been able to have the success you have with V&B Athletic in paying it forward and helping others, and then why now it's so special for me to be able to share that with you guys with First42K. And I think the reason First42K was born is I'd seen firsthand the impact that you'd had on my life, and I wanted to then share that with other people. And I know that Jase was very passionate about working one-on-one with people, and in that space of that one-on-one nature, you're very capped with your time. Like, there's only so many people you can take on. And so we thought, well, what if we could create something that would give other people that experience where they're getting that same level of really great support and great coaching, but it's accessible to everyone. I think looking at it as like, well, yeah, if you want to run 50 marathons in 50 days, then you need a tailored program. But for most people, a 5K, 10K, half marathon or a marathon, that would be such an incredible achievement. So for me to be able to work, with you, and then obviously the time that I had working with Jase and being on the phone with him pretty much every day in that year or so that I was able to share with him, it's some of the memories that I cherish the most. And, I think his passion for helping others is so true to this day. And I think that there's one more story that you've told me about, but I think it'd be amazing for you to share with the listeners, because it just does show how far his impact was. And then I want to touch on that Barley Hope experience a little bit more with you. But the conversation that you had with a woman recently who told you about Jase, that you actually didn't know this woman.
Oh, yeah. So I haven't actually caught up with her yet since she left me the message, but I went and did, so a lot of the normal qualifications for all the coaching we've been doing, Jase obviously had all of them. I had been getting around to getting them, but didn't need to because Jase had them and I was just sort of helping out. But so I've been, since he passed, just getting, finishing off my level 1, level 2 certification for athletics and, strength and conditioning and those sorts of things. But yeah, when I did the level 1 course, and it was a normal course, it was great. There was some really interesting people there. The instructor knew people that we ran with. She was based up in the Blue Mountains. But yeah, I had a message from her sort of really late that night after the course was over, just saying, and it was a reasonably emotional message, but just saying, look, really, I was so glad to see you were there and you're going to continue the V&B athletic thing, because Jase is the entire reason that I started running in the first place. And I as you say, I'd never met her before. It was such a special thing to hear. It meant a lot to know that. So, and that could have been, and we did spend a lot of, almost all of our event time and things together. So the fact that I hadn't realize that they had met before probably means it was one of those, 5-minute chats on one of the courses that he happened to be sweeping at the time or something. So that sort of is really special, that there's a lot of people out there like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think, one thing that, like, I'm so happy and proud that we can continue on with First 42K. It's obviously been a very tough time, and something, other people might look at and go, well, it would be very easy for you to end it right now and go your separate ways. But I think one thing that both of us are so passionate about is we know that Jase would really want us to continue with this, and likewise we would want you to continue with V&B Athletics. So whilst it's different now, navigating the future and what that looks like, it's a very special thing for me to be able to share First 42K with you, and we know that Jase will forever be the co-founder of First 42K, and every runner that comes through our program, it's going to be a testament to his coaching, as he is the person who built the program and exactly how I wanted it to be, someone who helped me achieve these feats. And I thought, well, he's the one that, out of any coach in the world, he needs to be the one that's going to help our runners going forward. So that's something that is pretty special to me. So talk to me a little bit more about the Bali Hope. You referenced that it was recent that you were able to do that with Jackie, and it was only, well, we're recording this chat on the 22nd of September. I think it was the 10th of September, that event. So tell me a little bit more about that. 84 kilometers across Bali. What does the event involve? I know it's a special event. I've done the event, but to the listeners that aren't familiar, talk to us a little bit more about that, and also, the impact that you're able to have when you're over there.
Yeah, it is. I've done a lot of different events, and more these days, for me, it needs to have something behind it other than just doing it. Like, there's always Red Bull Defiance was one that was just, let's just do it. That sounds like a lot of fun, and it was. But Bali Hope, and again, Sam Gash has a bit of a common thread through this podcast, because she got me into that as well. So she was asked to be the ambassador for this event. It's the inaugural event in 2018. All started by a guy called Tom Hickman, who's from the UK, had been living in Bali for quite a long time, and had seen a lot of sort of the educational issues in Bali particularly, and there were a couple of charities working in that space at the time. And he said, maybe I should do a run or something, and try and raise some money. So he sort of dreamt up the idea in 2017, I'm going to run across Bali, raise a bunch of money, and didn't quite finish yet. A dog stole his shoe at about 50K or so, and he made it a bit longer in mismatching shoes. And but there's a really good story behind that, which I leave to him to tell, because he tells it much better than I can. But that idea sort of gave birth to Bali Hope. He sort of knew about Sam, reached out to her, said, I think you'd be a great ambassador for this. Can you help? She called me then, I think almost straight after the call with him, and said, I've just been asked to be ambassador for this. It's got your name written all over it, because she knew my passion for that sort of stuff. Particularly, I think in my passion is really in health and education for kids, because you invest in that space, and it's a bit crass to talk about return on investment when you're talking about charity, but that's really what it is, right? Every dollar you invest in a child, they will return tenfold as they get older, because they also then feel an obligation to give back to society through the fact that they've been helped. So all of that sort of ticked the boxes for me. I've particularly been concerned about what Australians have done to Bali over the years in some of the very touristy areas, and so felt like I had an obligation to try and give back in some of that space. So I contacted Tom, said I was really interested. He sort of signed me up almost straight away. And it's an event. It's evolved a bit over the sort of 3 years now that it's run, but ultimately it's a week-long event that is more than the 84K run in incredibly humid and difficult conditions. It's, if somebody said to me, would you like to do an 84K road run in 80% humidity and 37 degrees, I would normally just say no outright. But doing it in Bali, and doing it in a way where you've spent sort of a few days in the lead up actually visiting the communities that you're actually going to impact through this event, is really special. So each year focuses on a particular community in northern Bali. This year was Songan. And so you go to that community, go to the schools that you're supporting, you meet with the kids, you meet with their families. You see in this, because I've been doing it a few years now, you actually see where the dollars that you've raised in previous years have been invested, and that can be like the actual kids who've been supported. Like quite often, this year particularly, we had a number of kids who were on scholarships who came to the visits with us, and then we're also on the courses, support marshals. We met their families who were driving the cars that we're in. It's really, on the ground impact, and entire communities being uplifted. It's not just sort of throw a few dollars at a community to build a school. It's investing in education programs, putting teachers in place, understanding each community has different issues. So the one in Songan that we went to this year, they had realised that there were learning difficulties amongst the kids because basically of a lack of education around how really young kids needed to get a range of different nutrients in their diets when they were young. There was a lot of sort of Western food and supplements being used instead of just fresh food and vegetables, which can lead to brain development issues, which gives learning issues and the rest. So a lot of the investment is actually in, again, this idea of holistic assistance. So really educating the community about how to feed their kids, which helps with brain development, which means they learn more. And if you get a whole generation of kids through one of these programs, they all go and get good jobs. They send money back to the village. The whole village gets lifted up. So you have all of this sort of stuff as the background to why you're there and what you're raising money for. People from all over the world come and do it in a small group of sort of 30 to 35 runners. And then you run together overnight, as you said, so from the north of Bali to the south. And it can be a race. It can be, there's usually 3 sort of separate groups. So there's a group who've never done something like this before, who just want to do it at their own pace. There's a group in the middle who maybe have got a bit of experience and are a bit faster. And then there's a group of sort of fast people who are there to try and run down the record that you set a few years ago. And they, so everyone, you leave a couple of hours apart, which means everyone sort of finishes around the same time. It's just a spectacular, the first few Ks are flat, and then it's about 20 Ks of going up and over a volcano. So you really cover, there's about 12 or 1300 meters of elevation in a pretty short 15K stretch. So it's really steep. And then it's basically undulating downhill for the rest of the run, with some pretty long straight stretches with a bit of traffic as you get into the next day. So it's sort of pretty hairy, but part of the experience, right? And you finish at a famous pub called Old Man's in Canggu in the south of Bali. So it's just a beautiful run, even though it's at night. There's a lot of the jungle. There's a lot of the houses are built right along the road. So you sort of get these insights into community life as well as you're running through there. There's a lot of dogs, as people know about Bali, that sound a lot worse than they are. Like they're all basically just defending their territory. So you just keep running and they're fine. There's just an amazing, the run sort of started to get a bit better known now. So there are a lot of kids that come out. The security guys who are there are actually really interested, and a lot of people sort of laugh at you at first when they ask where you're running to, because it's a pretty unusual thing to see in Bali, and you say Canggu and they assume that you're a stupid Westerner who hasn't understood the question. Yeah. So no, it's a really magical sort of event. And Bali, I'm not a particularly spiritual sort of person, but there is something about Bali which is really, they talk about the island having its own spirit, and it really is an incredible place to be and to run in. I can't imagine there's too many other events like it anywhere in the world, athletic events that have that sort of deep meaning and connection to the land that you're running on. So it's, other than maybe some of the sort of the Outback Marathon stuff, if you do that with real knowledge of the land that you're running on there, it is such a special run.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the questions that I want to hold, obviously each podcast, every guest is going to be different questions, but one that I want to be consistent with, as it is the First 42K podcast, is tell me about your first 42K, your first marathon. And yet I can't do that with you, DJ, as you went from a half through to 100K. So
I did.
It's a funny one to talk about because that's an extreme jump. But I want to, before we wrap up today's episode, I'd love for you to just take me back to that first ultra over in New Zealand and share a little bit about that. And then I'm going to ask people where they can find you if they want to get in touch, and go from there.
So the first ultra, the one you're talking about, that was the first one that Jase and I did together. And then we did pretty much every other run together after that. So I'd already done the 100K in the Blue Mountains, and Jase wasn't quite ready to jump to 100K, but there was an event called Motatapu, which is still on now, but I think it's only every couple of years. And it was only just over marathon distance. It might have been 48 or 50 or so. I've forgotten the exact distance now. But neither of us were really prepared. We hadn't sort of learnt anywhere near the lessons that we subsequently learned. And so it just sounded great. As it turns out, New Zealand has much bigger mountains than we have in Australia. And we started with a pretty steep climb. It wasn't too bad. There was a really, but there's a lot of ridgeline running. So there was sort of a ridge that you went down for a good few kilometers, and it was just downhill. So really heavy on the quads, massive drop off to either side, sort of 300-400 meter drop off either side of a ridge that was only probably 30 or 40 centimeters wide. Like it was quite hairy. Jase wasn't great with heights either. So it was a pretty scary way to start the thing. But we were just totally unprepared for what was involved in that run. And while it was quite short, it was a huge amount of elevation. We'd get to the bottom of a valley and we'd look up and we go, oh, there's no way they're sending us up that mountain. And then we'd see a little person disappearing over the top. Oh, yes. And so once you got through the first half, the back 20 kilometers, there were 20 something river crossings. And then there was about a 15-kilometer pretty straight shot after that. It was sort of all trail or fire trail or dirt road. But the first part just totally cooked us. And in fact, we were so slow that I think it might have been 13 hours, something like that. But as we were running in through the arch, basically the rest of the event hub was being packed up and they pulled the arch down after we went through it. So it was a magical experience. And it was something that we always said we would go back one day and do now that we knew what we were doing. So it is, I might have to drag you along on that one, but that's definitely something that I want to go back and do. But yeah, it really did teach us. I mean, we had a fabulous experience, but it really taught us a lot about preparing. We weren't prepared for the downhills. Like if you're running downhill for an hour and a half, 2 hours, which in a couple of cases we were, the quads just get absolutely smashed. And neither of us had done enough strength training to really prepare for that sort of stuff. But I mean, New Zealand is one of those magical places. The only other place I've ever sort of felt the same sort of magic in the mountains is in UTMB running around Mont Blanc, which is that sort of, you get that same, visceral emotion from being in and New Zealand has that same sort of thing. So it was very special for a lot of reasons for that. And we did, traditionally we bear crawled across the finish line. I don't quite remember why we started doing that, but there's a great photo of us bear crawling across the finish line. But then what was never captured was us collapsing in a heap and then the arch being pulled down behind us because they all wanted to go home. So it was one of those, at the time, not a great experience, but in hindsight, it was just such a wonderful thing that we did. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And a beautiful, beautiful memory for you, I'm sure, now to look back on and think about, regularly. So DJ, it's been awesome having you on. For people who want to connect with you, where should they go?
You can find all the contact details in the First42 on the First42K website. That's always the best place. But I'm on Instagram as DJ001. So you can, but always happy to chat, always happy to head along with a run for someone. So it's always lovely having a bit of a chat, Shawnee, and revisiting some of those great stories. So,
thank you for taking the time to have a chat with me. And I want to finish this episode by saying we wanted to make sure that the very first episode of the First42K podcast was brought to you by all of our co-founders. And in 2021, I was originally thinking I was going to create the Run for Wishes podcast. And I'm very grateful now, looking back, that I recorded an episode with Coach. And so we're going to round out this episode by sharing some of our favorite snippets from that podcast. And in the future, down the track, we will release that episode as a special episode as well. So thanks so much for listening. It's been a privilege to chat to you as always, DJ, and thanks for sharing your wisdom with others. And to those who've tuned in to our very first episode of the First42K podcast, thank you. It's a great thing to be able to have this opportunity now to chat on some of our experiences with running to hopefully help you fall in love with running as well. So I'm going to leave it there. DJ, thanks again.
Thanks, Shawnee. Bye for now.
I made the change from corporate life about 6 years ago. stepped away from the working in data analytics and data solutions to basically change career. And in that change, decided that I wanted to do something that could introduce people to what I love to do, which is being fit and running. And with my best mate and now business partner, David Jones, we created V&B Athletic. And that was just over 5 years ago. And since then, we've built that into a coaching business. We do fitness coaching, run coaching, online training for people from the ages of 20 all the way up to mid 60s. My history with running is I developed a taste for it in my late 30s. It was a means for me to recover from drug and alcohol abuse, and it was a step into basically rehab that got me into running. I needed to do something with my spare time that I found myself having after getting sober after many years, and it's been a pretty integral part of my life ever since. So I've managed to go from not running more than a couple of kilometres when I first started, now having achieved numerous miler events, running across Victoria, running across Bali, any number of events I've done over the past 10 years sort of led me to this idea with Dave to create the business of V&B Athletic, and that's where we are today. Corporate world for me was very much about finding the wrong reasons or finding success in the wrong places. And it wasn't until my mid to late 30s that I started to realize that success isn't about the dollars in your bank account or the number of assets you've got or the car that you drive. It's about how you can enrich people's lives through what you do from a day-to-day basis. And that's how I tend to live my life now, is helping others, focus on getting people fit and healthy, and both mentally and physically.
And didn't he do just exactly that? I want to share one last little piece from Jase's episode, and that is when he was reflecting on First42K.
Very proud of what we've been able to achieve so far with just hard work and effort from the team involved.
They are some nice words from Coach. To round out this first episode, from DJ and I, we wanted to leave you with one last thing, which was Jase's favourite saying that he would share with all of his V&B athletes and First42K runners. Don't forget to stretch, hydrate, and be the reason that somebody else smiles every day. Big thanks to Rin McDonald from Ruckus for producing this podcast. We hope you loved it, and if you did, please leave a review and share it with others. Special thanks to our partners at HGG Performance for providing the podcast space. HGG Performance manufactures strength and rehabilitation equipment, which is hugely beneficial for runners looking to improve performance and prevent injury.